I think that that's part of this notion of saying that, of course, there's going to be friction in any business or any school or any whatever, but how do we actually go back and still acknowledge those things, even accept them? It's not perfect, but we can still be fierce advocates for this better tomorrow that we're navigating the team toward, that we see as possible for whoever's on the receiving end of our leadership.
Totally. Not only accept them, embrace them. Like, this is my learning journey right here. I mean, I would say to anybody who's listening who's a parent, what would happen if your kids grew up in a bubble where no challenge was presented to them? They never had a problem. They never had to struggle. What would happen? You have to notice yourself, and then you'll notice the thought. You look in the mirror the first time. What's the thought you're having about yourself? That moment in the morning, spot it. Like, oh, okay, if it feels kind of crappy, then choose a different one. I wonder how many leaders, I'd love to know this, how many leaders, like at least once a week, say to somebody on their team, what would you like me to do more of, less of, start doing, stop doing? That's it. Give me those 4 things. Sometimes we don't really want to know, but it's such a powerful thing to do, and it takes 5 minutes, and you can learn a lot.
My very special guest is a thought transformation expert, keynote speaker, and executive coach who helps leaders and teams rewire limiting thought patterns to unlock breakthrough performance. She's a former Wall Street banker turned professional writer who blends neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and storytelling to show how changing our inner dialogue changes everything from collaboration to culture to results. She is Nancy Berger. Welcome to the show, Nancy.
That's just, you can't not feel good after hearing that. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I felt good after being able to see your keynote at a recent event that I was the MC of, and we had just a great conversation afterwards. So I couldn't wait to get you on the show and talk all about shifting our mindset.
Yes, let's do it.
Well, I'll get us started with this one. You had made this comment that thoughts are subconscious choices, and that one kind of stopped me in my tracks, thinking about choices that way. And a lot of my listeners are these managers who sometimes, we come out of like a quarterly planning session, or there's some sort of challenge in the business. We might feel a little bit conflicted because sometimes we could be handed, for example, some aggressive growth targets, but then we know the reality about how much it's going to take to get there. And I guess my question for you, Nancy, is that in this notion that thoughts are subconscious choices, help me connect those dots a little bit about sort of that inner dialogue that's happening and how that relates to choices.
Yeah, great question, Matt. So I want to be clear to differentiate between thoughts and feelings. Okay. So when the manager's walking out of that meeting and is just, oh man, I've got this I've got to do. And all of the feelings that manager has are valid and perfectly okay. Like, there's no bad feeling, right? There's just bad behavior. So feelings, we really can't control those. They happen to us. Anger, the frustration, the worry. But the thought is the choice. So I want to differentiate between the feeling and the thought. You can't tell anyone how to feel. You feel what you feel. But in that moment, that pause between that feeling, what comes up in your brain, the thought you choose that can lead to a behavior, you have a grand opportunity to make a different choice. So instead of, I feel between a rock and a hard place, we're not going to be able to meet this goal, my poor team. And then you have that choice. So you can choose the thought, how are we going to be able to mobilize our resources and get this done? What are some ideas? Let me call my team. Let's get curious. Let's start. You see what I mean? Like, I'm, again, not dictating thoughts here, but that's where the choice happens. And that's where the good stuff comes, because then you are helping fuel different behavior.
Yeah, I'm almost hearing you say that because the thinking, the rational process, the choice process is more similar to thought than emotions. We kind of feel them in our body. I think there's a whole different system inside of us, in our wiring and just in our human experience, that those two things are. It's not that they're not related or not incompatible, but they're different. So I feel like the choice is the thought, but the feelings, they just happen. You gotta let those happen.
Yeah, they just happen, and they are in a different pathway of the brain, right? They're in the limbic system, and that's where we don't even have language there, right? So we're just feeling our feelings, and we cannot really control them. But there's a little bit of real estate between the limbic, right, this brain stem, and the logical brain, which is up here. So we want to keep in that logical brain so we can make choices on the thoughts and then fuel better behaviors for ourselves.
For some reason, I'm getting a weather analogy. Like you can't control the weather, but once you find yourself in the weather, you can either grumble about it, sure, oh, that's fine, but you're going to make a better choice. Like, do I need to bring a raincoat, dress a little lighter, whatever it might be?
Yeah. And Matt, like I want to just validate your listeners right now because a lot of them are going to be rolling their eyes so hard. They're like in the back of their head and be like, yeah, that all sounds really slick, but doesn't really work. So it does work, but you have to practice it. And so the science behind it, and we'll get into that, the practical application, how long it takes, but it is something that you just have to practice like anything else.
And I think that on my own leadership journey, I think I've tried to study a little bit as I can these things, like you mentioned, the science. Like we don't have to go get PhDs and be like super neuroscientist people, but I think we have to, if we're going to be effective leaders, we have to understand that there is a certain there's a human aspect to this, and we understand how humans are wired and how the things we do might trigger them, and at the same time how we can use things like hope to actually fuel them, and all these kinds of things. So I do
Yep.
think it's worth us in this conversation, getting to that place for sure. But I think one of the things also that I think about with specific managers is that a lot of times, let's say that I've not done a good job of responding to my feelings and I'm in this kind of negative place and I haven't made the right conscious choice, but instead I just say, I'm just going to do the thing anyway. I'm going to make the presentation. I'm going to have the conversation in front of the executive team. I'm going to do the sales call with the client, even though I'm feeling like from this place of a little bit of either smallness or negativity or something not altogether positive. What's it like on the receiving end of that if you're the executive watching this take place or you're the customer listening to this salesperson who is not coming from a place of confidence? Like how do these things show up in the external world when they start in our internal world?
Yes, and it's such a great question if I could answer it, right? We can never ever get in someone else's head. We can never really predict with any degree of accuracy. We can speculate, but we don't know what other people are feeling or how they're experiencing us unless we ask them. So a lot of, coaching, and you and I both kind of get this, when I coach executives, C-suite leaders, like we're talking about how you're perceived. We're not talking about what you think you are, what I think you are. We're talking about how your stakeholders perceive you, how you are experienced by others. We know by asking them, by checking in. Okay, to get back to your question though, if I was to speculate about how, say I'm in a pitch meeting, and I'm kind of going into it feeling a little crummy, right? A little bit less than, don't have my fastball that day, whatever. I don't know how they're going to experience me because I'm probably not going to ask them in that moment. But what I can tell you with some degree of confidence is that they will experience me differently when I enter the room in that negative mindset than they would if I had done some positive self-talk, really checked my facts, looked at my accomplishments, went in there with my toolbox full of, empowering, bolstering stuff. They will experience me differently that way. That's just science. That's not even hard. It's like when you exude confidence, you build trust, that leads to sales, all sorts of good stuff happens. So there's a real difference in those two scenarios. And without knowing exactly how you experience, I can say it will be different.
It's interesting when you think about salespeople in particular, and it happens in every role. But I think a lot of times you're exposed to a lot of the negativity because in business we try to solve problems, and it's true in school system, true in government. It's just period. As humans we're wired to solve problems, so we really inundate ourselves with the problems and we roll around in it. And then you go and you're trying to make this effective presentation to your team or you're trying to make the sales call, you have all this negative stuff in your mind because you've been in problem solving mode. And now you're supposed to show up and be super positive about the future and all these things. And if you're not able to sort of make that shift, I think people pick up on that either explicitly or subliminally, one or the other. Just subconsciously, we're like, this person doesn't seem they're all that confident in their solution or the idea that they're trying to sell us on, in terms of where the team's headed, these kinds of things.
Right. And so how are you gonna how are they you're gonna sell your thing? Right? How are they gonna feel like, oh, this is where I wanna, I wanna hook my wagon up to this? Like, think about it. Now, a really simple thing, a simple adjustment would be love the problems. Like we're problem solvers. That's so correct. But love on the problems. Like when everything goes smoothly, there's no learning. In the stock market, they say priced to perfection. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. That's an understanding that, oh, it's all upside. No, that's not real. So love the process of the problem solving, because on the other side of that, there's growth and there's some kind of cool innovation. And it's a simple twist that we can start practicing, and that will change things.
This is why I love our conversations. That is a classic reframe. I mean, it's unbelievable the power of what you just shared, Nancy. Because when you think about it, the reality is that we are, as if there were no problems, what would we be needed to do,
Right.
right? But I think that being able to appreciate the problem, to live with the problems, but not be tainted by them to the point where you become disheartened and kind of hopeless. And I think that that's part of this notion of saying that, of course, there's going to be friction in any business or any school or any whatever, but how do we actually go back and still acknowledge those things, even accept them, that it's not perfect, but we can still be fierce advocates for this better tomorrow that we're navigating the team toward, or that we see as possible for whoever's on the receiving end of our leadership.
Totally. And not only accept them, embrace them. Like, this is my learning journey right here. I mean, I would say to anybody who's listening who's a parent, what would happen if your kids grew up in a bubble where no challenge was presented to them? They never had a problem, they never had to struggle. What would happen? Oh boy, right? So it applies, right? We're not different at work. Work is not different than life. It's just a different compartment, it's a different vehicle, but we have all the same stuff. So apply the same principles and things start to make a whole lot of sense.
And I think that brings me to some of this notion about the different recurring thought patterns, because I think sometimes, if we get in the habit, sometimes if we're maybe not as intentional or as thoughtful, sometimes we can be overwhelmed a little bit by our emotions. Yes, I think right now people are experiencing a lot of cognitive challenges in the sense of how much overwhelm, things are moving so fast. It feels like in some ways I talk to leaders that say, I just haven't even got my footing since the pandemic. It's been years of just constant surprises and changes and frustration. So my question for you, Nancy, is when you think about the nature of your clients and the conversations you're having, what are some of these more counterproductive or sometimes even toxic thought patterns that you see managers, senior leaders, other people, starting to show up with?
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind as you ask the question is one of my coaching clients uh, who was a chief legal officer in a large firm in the Boston area. In one of our first meetings, said to me, "My team is in pain." And it was a powerful statement. It was a humble statement by that leader. It told me that there was humility there, and that's a really great thing. But it also told me that we're coming from that perspective. So it's a little obtuse, but I'm answering your question because it's not a toxic thought, but that leader was right in it. There was no, how can I help my team? How can I change the experience of my team? I'm really excited to do that. I want to do that. I am not wishing for it. I'm wanting it. And that starts building a pathway to get there, right? But when we're in that space, and I'm not criticizing at all, it was just, I observed it. We're in that space of my team is in pain. Well, that's the suffering space. And it's an indicator that the leader really cares. Now let's get into, I want to change this. It's this nuanced thing, Matt, but it makes such a difference in your brain and body. And it propels you forward into growth, right? Growth mindset, out of the binary, good or bad. And these are the types of thoughts. It sounds so simple, but once I can get people to notice that, then and with this leader, we were off and running because we could contextualize the whole thing in that, starting with that one thought.
It's like you help them pierce the bubble, right? And just realize that you don't even recognize, because a lot of times when we're just talking, especially with somebody like you that gets us talking, and then we just don't even realize sort of how we're framing, but you're helping us frame our thoughts. And you kind of hold up the mirror and say, "Do you see how you're framing this?" It's almost as if you're framing it as almost like you're powerless, or you're not. And then you're like, "Well, that's," and it might be unintentional, but it happens.
It happens. And I want to be careful not to sound like, pie in the sky. I'm just trying to paint everything with a positive brush. That's not what we're doing. We're making really, really intentional choices about the words that we use, the thoughts that we have, because they change everything. And this is not new. This has been around for a long time. I'm not telling anybody anything new. I'm just trying to get people to try it once and then keep going, because the change can be really life changing.
Yeah, and psychology nerds like myself, and I know you've studied this as well. Decades ago, we started actually shifting psychology from what was wrong with people. Let's get them to some average or some normal, into positive psychology. And Seligman and others talked about this learned helplessness. And it's just over time we feel stuck. And I feel like there's almost been a regression in some ways, because we've had this pattern of this chronic exposure to challenge and stress. And I feel like we're a little bit overwhelmed. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's okay. Again, like if you're listening on the call and you're like, okay, but I feel like my automatic thoughts tend to skew a little bit more, less hopeful than before. I think this goes back to the first question where you're saying that's the feeling, that's great, but the thought creates space for that choice. And what you did for that leader was to say, hey, you've got room in here now that we're in this safe space. You're in this mindful, intentional kind of space. You can choose. And it sounds like you help them make that transition and say, okay, I'm going to be the one who helps my team, serves them, whatever it might be. And then that will change the environment that they find themselves in.
It changes the environment. And then when they checked in with their team after 6 months of doing this, it was a different perception held by them, a completely different perception held by them. And that's possible for every leader, everyone. That's possible for everyone. And it just starts with one thought. So I get pretty jazzed about this, because it is something everyone has the power to do right now. And like right now, like just start, and it's not positive thinking. It's not positive thinking, because that has an implication of, kind of fluffy, but it's really intentional thinking.
And you create your own opening. And I think that's what you've helped us do, is understand, like, there is that space, there is that opening that we can create and say, is this really what I want? And do I have the wherewithal to, make a different choice and affect a different outcome in that moment, which is, it's super powerful to think about it in that way.
It is super powerful. Like how many days do you wake up, Matt, in the morning and say out loud, what do I want to accomplish today? What am I going to make today be? What am I going to, like, we don't give ourselves permission to do these goofy things that really can set us up for a different kind of experience. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that also becomes one of those patterns of thinking when you feel you have to always be on, you always have to be working, and you don't give yourself time to replenish. The other thing I think that's really important is you tied us back to checking in with your team, because we sometimes make assumptions. Like in the case of that leader, they might say, my team's in pain. You're like, how do you know that? And then you ask and they're like, well, yeah, we were, but that was, when this thing was happening, it's not happening now. We're actually good to go. You're the one who's in pain. You're like, oh my gosh, that happens all the time.
Yes. And like, I wonder how many leaders, I'd love to know this. And I hope people will write into you and tell you how many leaders, like at least once a week, say to somebody on their team, what would you like me to do more of, less of, start doing, stop doing? That's it. Give me those 4 things. How many times sometimes we don't really want to know, but like, it's such a powerful thing to do. And it takes 5 minutes and you can learn a lot.
Yeah, I'm never not surprised when I think to ask the question, because the things that I thought to be true, or something, it might be some nuance to it. You're never not pleased that you had the conversation, that you took the time to ask, because the read's always going to be a little bit different. We don't have perfect vision when we're trying to understand the way other people are experiencing our leadership. So I think that when you check in with them and understand, like, you can really start to educate yourself, but you can make better choices. Back to your earliest point.
Yeah, and you also normalize it and desensitize yourself a little bit. Start doing it at home with your immediate loved ones. It's a just start, I start with my kids. Hey, how am I doing as a mom? I always get a very funny response like, "Are you sick, mom?" But I do it, and I always learn something. So start in a low stakes environment, with a loved one, a partner, a family member, and then spread it into your work life. You'll normalize it. It'll be part of your thing. You won't feel like it's an event, and you won't brace yourself anymore. You'll just be like, there's going to be some good stuff. There's going to be some criticism, and that's okay because we're embracing the problem, right? We're gonna learn from it.
Yeah, and this is everything is very connected in our conversation today in my mind, because what's going to happen is as soon as you ask for somebody and they tell you something that might be a little bit constructive or even critical, and you weren't ready for it, that's going to produce that feeling in your body. That's where the emotion is like, oh my gosh, why didn't you say something sooner? No, I don't. Or and all of a sudden you're arguing in your brain at least, and you're like, hold on a second, let all that emotion kind of rip its way through your body. That's fine, but still stay in control and make the choice. How do you want to respond? And I think in those moments, if you do what Nancy, what you shared with us, which is like, go and ask the question, doggone it, it's be curious. Before you respond, before you try to say, no, I don't, or anything, just be curious. Ask another follow-up question, like while you're trying to gain your footing.
That's it.
These
Matt,
things are great.
Yeah, you said it. Ask the follow, because sometimes we get knocked off balance, and we're having those feelings. We're flooding. Our mouth gets dry. We're nervous, right? So ask the follow-up is brilliant. Tell me more about that. Or could you give me an example, the most recent example? It gives you a chance to process and to stay grounded, and they're talking more. So you don't have to get all flummoxed. You can say, I want to hear more about that. And I'd love an example. And also then that signals to them, you really do care. You're interested.
Yeah, I think I've been given the gift that is, I've gotten older, I realize how much I don't know. And I've gotten so much more comfortable with not having to have the answers. When I was young, especially in the service, when I was in the Marines, I was like, if I don't have the answer, I better tell them I'm going to go find the answer. And that was fine. But it's kind of artificial. I mean, at some point, as you continue to get promoted and you're at, in more senior levels of an organization, you can't know you don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years for your company to, survive in these things. So you get more comfortable not having all the answers. So it's become easier for me now to be curious or to realize that there's things that are like, I have no idea what the answer to that question is. And it's okay. I mean, what are you going to do? Right.
But that, Matt, if I may, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of this, imposter syndrome, which is the elephant in everyone's brain. Right. So, but I want to speak to it because it's a perfect segue from that. So you don't have all the answers, but that doesn't make you an imposter, right? So how is it that we got so good at jumping from I don't know the answer to that question to I must be, the whole thing's a fraud, right? An imposter. Okay, if I interviewed with NASA and because of my charm and good looks, I got a job as to work on the space shuttle. I mean, whatever. I would be an imposter. I would have faked it to get that job so I could say I work for NASA, right? But imposter syndrome is when the reality is different from the thoughts, right? So that's where we can't make that jump. I don't know how to do this I don't deserve this job. They're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my goodness. How did we do that? So that's where this intentional, take a moment, take a beat, pause, look at why you're there in that role. What got you there? The facts. And then please, let's not jump over, off the bridge into, well, it's all bad and I don't know anything. And I'm fooling everybody, because that's where we tend to go. Catastrophic kind of thinking. We're so good at it, but we can stop it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where the imposter, which I know all too well, is this notion that people are going to find out.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are they going to find out? That you're not perfect, that you're human? You're like, yeah, guess what? Let me fast forward that part of the process for you. They know, right? They know, and it's going to be okay. And I think that's so much where, your own internal fear instincts and anxiety and ego and self-interest starts to shout so loudly that it's kind of like what we talked about earlier, when you stay awash in the problem space, but you don't really appreciate the fact that you can love your problems. Like you can love the parts of yourself that you're still working on and be unapologetic about it, because there is you're not going to ever achieve that perfect state and become the perfect leader, like they don't exist. So I think so many years I beat myself up and with the imposter syndrome and still struggle with it today at times, but it's always because something has gone sort of amok. Something's taken over sort of the thought. But when you create that space and you make the better choice and you start to look and say, well, this is just a story I'm telling myself. And the reward for that story for me over the years was high performance, but no pleasure, right? No, like, wellness didn't come along with it. Only performance did. And then you're like, oh man, this was not a bargain worth, sacrificing for.
No, and in the mix, this is a really important thing for the listeners to take away, if you would please. That when, as a leader, you show your underbelly, you reveal that you don't have all the answers. Guess what? You build trust in your team. You build cohesion and communication and collaboration and all the good stuff. Nobody wants a leader that they think knows everything and does everything right. They just don't. That doesn't make them follow you more. And so that's an important thing to understand. When you show that vulnerability and you walk into a team huddle and you say, wow, did I screw up this week? Let me tell you how. And maybe you guys have some insight into how we can avoid this in the future. Oh my gosh, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and when you learn to still be confident in your imperfection, I think something powerful unlocks, right? Because there's no reason to not feel that way. And people do respond positively to confidence, but also to vulnerability. And both can be true at the same time. And I think that's a paradox that I didn't understand early in my leadership journey. I felt like, well, you have to be perfect if you're going to, win people's admiration and success and followership. And later on, you're like, well, wait a second. How can I be confident if I don't have all the answers, if I haven't done all the things and checked all the boxes? The answer, it was just a fallacy, total fallacy. But instead, saying, how do you retain your confidence, knowing that, yeah, there's strengths. Of course, you're going to build your strengths. You're going to study, work hard, all those things. And you're going to try to be an upright leader. But at the same time, you're going to fall a little bit short in some cases. You're not going to be perfect. And both can be true.
Both can be true. The dialectic, right? The and thinking. It's this and that, not this but that.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
100%, 100%. So let's say that one of the listeners is there and thinking, you know what, Nancy, you're making a ton of sense, because that's what I think. That's what everyone thinks when they hear you. And then they think, I want to try this. What should I do to start? Like, this might be new to some folks who are listening in, or maybe it's not new and they just have a rekindled sort of appreciation for making more thoughtful choices. Like, what does it look like in tactical terms? Like, what do we do first?
You notice yourself. It probably sounds oversimplified. Just notice yourself. We're not great at noticing ourselves. We get in the rabbit hole. We just go along. It's like when you're on Instagram and you get down the wormhole, and for me it's dogs being reunited with their owners and the tears. And so you have to notice yourself, and then you'll notice the thought. So for instance, let's give a practical example. Like we were talking about, you wake up in the morning, right? And it's in my keynote, as you remember. But you look in the mirror the first time. What's the thought you're having about yourself? That moment in the morning, like this, and you're brushing your teeth. What's the thought you're having about yourself? It may be a function of the pitch you have to do, or the one-on-one you have to do with your manager, or a direct report, or whatever it is, or a sit down with your kid who, got in trouble, whatever. What's the thought? Notice the thought, spot it. Like, oh, okay. If it feels kind of crappy, then choose a different one. That's what I would tell people to do, because in my experience in both speaking and coaching and doing workshops with groups, people will often give me feedback, whether they've tried things or not. And very often I hear, I never think about what I'm thinking about. That metacognition. I don't think about what I'm thinking about. So this morning, I actually noticed what I was thinking about, and it wasn't all that kind to me. And I chose a different one. So I would start there and do it consistently for at least 2 weeks. Okay? Because that's generally 2 weeks is when you may start to get that new thought, some stickiness. 2 to 6 weeks, but the consistency in the practice, just start that simply. Everybody can do that, right?
I like that a lot. And I also think that by replacing a default thought, we'll call it, with a more intentional thought, there's a part of, I don't think we always appreciate the fact that in our psychology that we have these layers almost, and some are a little bit more subconscious and some are a little bit more kind of right at the tip of our brain, so to speak. But I don't get the sense that the subconscious really cares. It just kind of follows the order. Like, what do we think about ourselves today? Oh, we think we're not good enough. All right, let's run that program. They're like, no, no, no. Actually, that was the thought, but now I'm replacing that with the fact that, hey, in this situation, I do know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to crush that meeting. You're like, okay, all right, fine, we're going to run that program. And I think it sounds glib, but I think there's some real truth to that.
There is absolutely truth to it. Science backs it up, data backs it up. It's just science, folks. It's not, we're not making this up. Matt and I are not making this up. Like, this is backed by science. And here's another thing people tend to do. They tend to say, oh, if I walk into the pitch and I'm feeling all, my feathers, I'm all puffed up, well, I'm going to jinx myself. I'm going to Oh, if we could just get rid of the whole I'm going to jinx myself, because think as you're walking in that it already went well. It already went well. You will show up differently. They will experience you differently. It's just all of this is just stories, as you said, Matt. Stories we're writing and believing. We can write different stories, by God, and they can be just as we have as much of a chance of those being true.
Yes, and I think sometimes it sounds so obvious or so, whatever you want to call it, that we overlook its power. But I think, like, if you go to the highest peak of anything, could be orchestra, could be the Olympic athletes, whatever. When they're doing visualization, they're not imagining themselves failing; they're imagining themselves succeeding, and even if they don't actually execute in their body, they don't win the gold medal, whatever it is, they come up a little short. Like, that practice, that technique, that sort of mindset that they're creating for themselves is a very deliberate and intentional choice. And I think we can learn something from that. And it's so amazing to think we can emulate it too. No matter how I wake up in the morning and I don't have hair to brush, but I do have teeth to brush. Whatever thought that is, if I don't like the thought that pops in automatically, we'll replace it. It's so incredible what a technology the mind is to be able to replace the default conversation pattern, right?
Yeah, and if it's hard, like, you could even say stop. Like, I've encouraged my children to do this in their worst times of anxiety. Just say stop. I said, remember in school when it was stop, drop, and roll if there was a fire? Just say stop, stop, and then shift. And these are tools we all have in our toolbox. We just kind of don't use them all the time.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that for whatever stage of our journey we're on, whatever we're trying to accomplish next, we can do that. The techniques you're teaching us are so accessible to us. Who can't do those things? It's really incredible.
And it's not magic. It's just training your brain. And, again, this has been all kicking around for so long. Let's really use it. See what happens. That's where the possibilities come. That's where you start to see, I can really I want to do that. Okay. How do I get there? It's just a fun, why not try it? You've got nothing to lose and a lot to gain.
Well, yeah, 100%. And I think maybe just to kind of bring us a little bit toward the close, like when you talk about working with your clients and these things, what can we expect if we do this hard work that you're teaching us? What gets better from a result of us, sort of taking that default mindset and chatter and shifting it a little bit more intentionally?
Yeah, it's not really linear. So first, part A, I'm going to answer from the science perspective, what changes in the brain. So as I said, 2 to 6 weeks, consistent practice of choosing different, better, more empowering thoughts. They will get stickier and that will start to be your default. Sometimes it takes 8 to 12 weeks to really get where you want to be. So it's automatic. Like, you're just not. Okay. So between 2 and 12 weeks, number one, part A. Part B is the nonlinear outcome. So it's not linear. When you are doing this, think of it as almost like branch logic or branches up into a tree. You're opening up yourself to possibility. And in these different steps along the way, when you're choosing different thoughts and they're more empowering and they build on each other, it builds on itself. And it's almost geometric, because then it's like, how to stop yourself from the imposter thoughts, stop yourself from the negative thoughts, stop yourself from the self-limiting thoughts. But what that opens up is just doors to the left, to the right, in front, all over. And that's the cool thing, because you don't really know what you will avail yourself of once you start really cultivating that mindset. And I've seen really cool things happen in not huge dramatic ways. It may be a client that couldn't even imagine walking into their manager's office and asking for something. And then it becomes second nature. Like, well, this month I'm going to ask for this. So these are the best days of my life when these things happen.
Well, and what makes me happy too is I have this always a recurring thought about understanding the ripples that are not always so visible. So when you send that manager back in and now they're able to advocate for themselves or to show it better for their teams, like everything gets better. There's these ripple effects that kind of rip through that. And people are like, oh, I had a better day at work than I have had in a long time. Why? Well, because Charlie, asked me a thoughtful question about my work. And historically, it's always been too busy for me. And it's like, these conversations actually happen in people's families when they're talking about how was work, and
Exactly.
it's
Splash effect,
unbelievable.
as you say. And it's like, and the effect, rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's just, and Simon Sinek says, be the leader you want to have. What
Mm.
happens then is just, it penetrates organizations. It's cool stuff.
I'm going to be the coach I want to have. That's you, Nancy. I'm going to be Nancy when I grow up. Listeners, you got to understand how much fun I'm having with this conversation. And normally I would keep it going for another hour, but no, not for the podcast. But I tell you what I'll do, Nancy. I give us a hard shift, which is that I always like to play a fun trivia game at the end of my segment here. It's always a lot of fun. And when you and I first met, I walked into a grand hall and you were up on stage tuning your guitar. It was amazing. And you had your hunky, handsome husband was your roadie that day. It was awesome. I got to meet Scott. But I wanted to ask us this question based on female guitarists. Let's see how we do with this one. Which female guitarist is best known for her work with the band Heart and the iconic riff from Barracuda? Is it A, Joan Jett, B, Nancy Wilson, or C, Bonnie Raitt? Well, these are some classic female guitarists.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I actually know this one. I think I do. I think Ann and Nancy Wilson were the band Heart for sure, and I can hear her singing that Barracuda.
But the Barracuda thing, I would say, because Bonnie is more known for her slide guitar, I would say it's Joan.
Joan Jett? It might be. It might be. Should we go with Joan Jett? Let's try Joan Jett.
Yeah, let's try.
All right, audience, if you're playing along at home, again, female guitarist with Heart, known from Barracuda, Joan Jett is what we're going with. Is it A, Joan Jett, B, Nancy Wilson, or C, Bonnie Raitt? And we're going to go here and find out that the answer is beep, boop, beep. Oh, not quite. It turns out it was Nancy Wilson.
It was Nancy.
Yeah, she co-founded Heart back in the 70s.
That was something. They were amazing.
Yeah, they were amazing. And I think that you're amazing too. I heard you playing you wrote a custom song. It was an amazing keynote. I loved it. But I had not expected to see you playing guitar as part of your keynote. It was delightful, absolutely delightful. Something else to be delightful though, is if you tell us, Nancy, where can my listeners go to learn more about you and all the great work you're doing?
Oh, thanks, Matt. They can find me on my website, nancyrburger, BURGER.com. All my information's there, social icons, everything. And I love to hear from people. So shoot me an email, a note, tell me what resonated with you about this, what didn't. Let's get in an argument. I love that.
There you go. Listeners, I highly encourage you to do that. Nancy's such a fabulous conversation to have. And I'll have that link for you in the show notes. So you're only one click away from getting over and connected to Nancy. Nancy, thanks so much for being with us and sharing your indispensable knowledge today.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing yours. And it was really a lot of fun.
And leaders, thank you, of course, as well for investing in yourself, listening to the podcast. If you've got 30 seconds, would love for you to leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or whatever podcast platform you listen to. Helps me recruit other great guests like Nancy, and we can learn all about that. And that's it for today's show. So don't manage the business when you can lead the people.